I'm Ben Carr. I'm your host. I'm with Halcyon, and we're here to talk about a little bit of security here at RSA. And today I've got a great guest, got Stuart Mitchell with Hampton North. Stuart, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Yeah, blast to be here. Excited for this one.
Yeah, maybe for those of you, I think a lot of people in security have heard about you, know about you. You do a lot of good work posting on LinkedIn about things that are happening in the security industry and the job market.
Yep.
But maybe you could give an intro and talk a little bit about Hampton North, and maybe we'll go from there.
Sure. So yeah, I'm a cybersecurity recruiter. I've been doing it for a long time, 10 years now.
And when you say that, you specialize in cybersecurity,
in
right?
cybersecurity. Yeah. That's my world. I stay in my lane. I don't try and take over the world. But yeah, cybersecurity, I've been hiring in it for 10 years. I've worked with some amazing companies over the years. And yeah, started my own, hung my own hat just under 2 years ago. Our practice has done very well in a very short amount of time. And I think one of the things that is maybe overlooked is recruiters get such a 1,000-foot view of the market because we get so many different perspectives because of our network. And so it allows us to kind of really dig under the hat of like what the talent market looks like versus what you might see as a practitioner.
Yeah, that's great. So, when I think about the market right now, I think there's a lot of different perspectives on it, right?
Of course.
But I'd like to understand from your view, actually being in it kind of day in and day out, what are you seeing? What's it look like? And maybe break it down into, at the C-level, executive SVP level from cyber, at the, kind of mid-tier, manager level. Yeah. And then at the, IC/entry level person, like what's that look like? What's the real thing? Are we really seeing like a lack of people and resources? Are people hiring? Like there's a lot to break down there,
yes.
But let's talk through all that.
Yeah. And I'm going to layer those answers. And I think, let's start with the executive level market. The executive market last year sucked. I think no one will, you might have a few people that say it was okay, but it was really rough and it was really tough to see as somebody who has a professional network of wonderful people who have achieved such amazing things, not being able to help them and not being able to even be able to point them in the right direction was really difficult. And I think a lot of wonderful people were sat on the outside looking in and it was brutal. And it wasn't a fun part to be a part of that. But I think the market is a little warmer now. I think even at RSA, you can feel the energy is a little better. We're seeing a little bit of movement. I'll plug Kyle Sharman's Sec Moves. Yeah. The week before, we had the biggest that he's seen in the history of his newsletter. So I think the vibe is up. I still think we have a long way to go to, kind of prior to 2022, like how many people were in your inbox giving you amazing opportunities.
Yeah, it was crazy, right? There was a time when like you couldn't like get enough people to leave you alone, right? Yeah. It was hot. But I think, you're certainly over the last 2 years, it's been odd. It's been strange, right? And I think that's super odd in the face of all the regulation and issues we're seeing. Like you would think quite the opposite.
Yeah, and a lot of it is, the companies care. Like, are they that bothered, or do they just put it in seats? And I think at least at the public level, like there's two different types of companies. There's those that have been hit and those that haven't. And I can tell you that the security the security posture and the level of CISO they hire on a company that knows the stakes is so different. It is so different versus and there's companies in the Fortune 1000, there's companies in the Fortune 100 that still pay like crap, put it 4 levels below what it should be, don't offer any, insurances or guarantees or anything like that. And it just, it doesn't make sense because you're right. The regulations and the changes that should be happening and, security should be taken seriously in these huge companies. I mean, it should be taken seriously everywhere.
So you open up a couple things there, right? Where it necessitates, I think, breaking it down a little bit further before we dive into the other stuff. And so I guess I asked a really broad question up front, which has sometimes happened, but I want to make sure we hone in on a couple things. So, when you think about those issues that you're bringing up in companies that are taking it seriously versus not, I'm interested. What's your thought on reasons why CISOs are either looking to move or, VPs, directors are looking to move? What's the number one thing you're hearing? Is it because, hey, company's not taking this seriously? Like I'm not getting the support I need. I don't have the budget I need. Or is it just, general malaise and people wanting to move on? Like, where is that coming from? Because I have my own opinions, which I may have bled into, but
I would say, and this is anecdotal data, but I would say somewhere around 80% of people feel really unsupported in their role.
Yeah.
And, the reality is it's, hey, we're cutting down resource, we're cutting down spend, reduce your team, but we still need the same. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to expect that. And you wouldn't do that with a sales team. You wouldn't do that with a product team. You wouldn't do that with a marketing team. But for some sick reason in security, we think, hey, well, you guys can keep the risk profile the exact same with 30% of the resource. And what I find is, and we're a sick bunch in security, right? So we just burn ourselves to the tail, right? We'll do everything in our power to keep us out in the news, to get the regulations done, to get things pushed over the line. And so people work themselves to the point where they just can't stand being there anymore. And I think that is probably the root of it is, it's very unfair, but these executive leadership teams don't go, okay, well, you're going to have 30% of the spend. What can we do here? It's, hey, like, we expect the same. And people just burn themselves to the very end of their tether and they're sick of it.
I've seen so many people in security who, like you said, they genuinely care, right?
Yes.
Like they're in it because they believe in the mission. I'd almost equate it, and I know, look, we may get some concern over this, but like, people in the military are actually concerned about protecting the country, right?
Yes.
And that's the way they come out of that, and they don't understand that lack of understanding in the same, because the general population doesn't have that. And I think it's the same here. Like people who are in cyber, they're defending, right, corporate assets,
Yes.
corporate control, and they see themselves as that defender role, and so then that affects their mindset. And when they feel like they're not supported, it's a very frustrating experience.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, particularly those that have risen to the executive level at this point, got into the industry because they care, right?
Yeah.
I think, there's a new wave, and we'll get into that in a bit, where people see a paycheck.
Sure.
But I think the people who have made it to the executive level care about what they do, got into this industry before it was shiny, before, RSA was a multi-billion-dollar event, and it was just a bunch of people hanging out, and the whole black hats and whatnot.
I was having a conversation with somebody I think it was last night or the night before at RSA, right? Having drinks after RSA, and we were sitting there talking about, when you look around the room at the people who you're generally talking with RSA, and it's a lot about catching up with old contacts. Like, these are the people that founded the industry,
yes.
Right? Like, I had conversations yesterday with several people who would be considered luminaries, right?
Yeah.
Ron Gula, right? Art Corviello, right? Like, these are people that are foundationally, like, they're the foundation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we got into this for a reason, and we're all having these interesting conversations, but things haven't changed that much, right? Like, we're still seeing the same issues and the same problems, and it's just been frustrating.
And you look at the stakes today versus what they were 20 years ago, and it's horrifying, right? The stakes are so much higher.
Well, I hate to hit back on Change Healthcare, right? It seems like that's the thing that it's on. Everybody talks about it because it's huge, right? But 1 in 3 people, in the U.S. somehow affected by it. A $22 million ransomware payment, which is quite large. I mean, I can think of many security budgets that aren't 22 million, right, for companies. But $1.6 billion of impact for Change. Like, what was the budget for security at Change Healthcare? And I'm guessing it wasn't
not 1.6 billion.
It wasn't 1.6 billion, right?
Yeah.
So their investment could have theoretically paid off dividends if they had tried to address that problem. Now, it's a risk conversation, right?
Of course.
And I think that's probably, when you talk to people, most good CISOs understand that. Would you say that?
Yeah, I would think so, right?
So what's driving the conversation of people who actually are looking to hire CISOs at that executive level? Is it, do you find that we're entering into a different phase, or has it not moved much?
So there's 2 camps, right? There's people that hire the CISO because they know it's the right thing to do, and there's companies that hire CISOs because that's what they're supposed to do, right?
So if they're hiring it from the right reasons, what's compensation look like, right? What's the and we can certainly talk numbers, but also like, what are the there's the core comp, right? But then there's all the other things that make up a package that a good CISO should be looking at, and what should CISOs be taking into mind that, like, don't look at a job if you're not at least having these discussions.
Yeah, and I think the compensation piece is variable based on the risk of the company, the size, the org structure, etc. And I think that one can vary a bit more. So And
I'm more interested in
I think it's a really
the
good
other
point.
piece, right? Where people think comp and they think, oh, what's my base?
Yeah.
That's not your full comp, right? Like, your comp is severance, D&O,
and
like
this
all
is
those
it,
things. So
right?
what are you seeing there?
So the better people in the industry negotiate for these things, and it is so important. We only have to look at SolarWinds, right? Like, and how that's may like play. But D&O, like insurance, like you have to have access to that. You have to have counsel, and if you're going to be a full guy or gal, you need to be protected on the way out the door if that is who you're going to be.
So I think a concern from a lot of people when they're negotiating these things, right? And we're focusing a lot on the CISO. I want to pivot a little bit coming up, but let's close it out maybe with this is what's I think a lot of CISOs have concerns that if they go into the negotiations, they ask for these things, that it's going to sour the discussion, right? Or they're not going to, people are going to say, yeah, look, this isn't the conversation we want to have. So I think it's a fair question, but I'm not necessarily seeing that. Like even if the answer is no, the discussion's a valid discussion to have if the company's serious about the role, right?
And that's what you'll see, right? There's things that can happen during the process because executives, boards, etc., are so wonderful at selling what the opportunity is going to be. You're going to bring in your own team. You're going to get access to these products, these partnerships, etc. And there's things like these conversations along the way that will tell you how serious these are, because anyone can promise anything on, through words of like, hey, you can hire 50 people or whatever. And a lot of the times you speak to people and like, hey, it never played out the way it was supposed to. And it's the things that happen during conversations of, hey, I need to report to X, or I need to have this access to the board, or I need D&O insurance. I need direct access to outside counsel if I'm coming on board. I think working with an exec recruiter allows you to let someone else have these negotiations sucks because you're about to get into a working relationship with people, but you're both kind of fighting a little battle on the way. So I think having somebody do that for you just removes the animosity where possible.
And I think a lot of people they don't do negotiations all day. I mean, CISOs, we may think we're negotiating all day, but we're negotiating with vendors and VARs, and it's different when you have a personal stake in it, right? So it's almost like you're having a third party assist and kind of give you some guidance on that.
Yes,
right?
Exactly that. And I think it's useful. Again, there's companies that hire directly, and that sometimes that's not possible. But I think, you have to look at it as an unemotional process, which is difficult because people are emotional. It's one of the weirdest things about being a recruiter is like some things that should happen, people make decisions on very irrational reasons because people are people, they are not technology. Yeah. But you need to be having these conversations. And I think
I think no matter what level you're at, like there's a benefit in having a relationship with several different recruiters, right?
Of course.
And we've known each other for quite a number of years, and like I know you as well as other people have said, look, even if I'm not the recruiter on this role, if you're looking at something, like feel free to reach out and like have a discussion. I can tell you this isn't normal or this is normal. I mean, it's advice. It's not just a one-time transaction. It's a relationship, right?
Yeah, and there's some wonderful people. It's a small handful, but there's a group of us in this industry that I think take care of our own, and that's why we're welcomed, and that's why we're able to kind of sustain our businesses. But if you're a CISO who doesn't have someone who has your best interest at heart, I would say make friends with a recruiter. It never hurts. And if you're going through that process, how to approach the questions. I think what people find frustrating right now is because there was a shortage of opportunities last year, people are bending the knee a little bit in terms of what they're willing to accept, both from a cash compensation perspective. But if you're having this conversation around reporting structure and D&O, and it's like, okay, well, we'll offer it to them, the other candidate who doesn't care so much about that. And what people don't realize is they're screwing their peers and they're screwing the industry. And I'm not saying that there should be a union, but like there should be a...
Well, we've talked about that. Like we had a conversation at a dinner the other night, and really the conversation kind of pivoted and led to this discussion about, look, should there be a professional organization for CISOs, right? There's a PE, professional engineer. Yeah. You've got the bar for lawyers, right? There's stuff for finance. Like, it really seems like there needs to be this forward movement for CISOs to kind of band together and like what's standard and due care, what's the typical job description look like, what's roles and responsibilities, what's your reporting structure look like. A lot of these things could fall into that.
And you look at the bar as a great example, right? If you can be disbarred, right? Yeah. If you act immorally without strong ethics, and I think it's one of the best traits of it should be the main trait of the CISO is like, what is actually the right thing to do here? And in law, if you bend the law to the point of breaking it, you're disbarred, right? Is there a world where CISO should be disbarred based on, you know, negligence or poor morals? And I think if you have a professional accreditation that's not an accreditation to make a certification company very wealthy, because I have some feelings around that, but a pure professional accreditation that is also taking care of, you know, you look at the writer's strike in Los Angeles, right? Like everyone banded together and everything played out the way it should. I'm not saying CISO should go on strike by any means.
Yeah,
but
I'm not in favor of a CISO union, but yes, but
there
I think
should be a group
general
of
practices.
Folks. Exactly. So I think it makes sense, and I think at some point things will bubble, because, you know, there's folks who, you know, have risen very quickly, and you know, if there was a formal process to go through, I think some things are missed along the way. And I think, again, you know, if you're part of an accredited group, going back to the compensation conversation, there should be a minimum set of expectations to hire from said accredited group.
Makes sense. So let's dive a little down the stack, right? Because we've been talking about CISOs in kind of executive areas, SVP and above. What about kind of mid-tier? What you know, middle management, like you know, directors? Like, what are you seeing in that market? Is the talent out there? Does it exist?
Yes.
Is it overpriced? Do we? Yeah, just where is it?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of points in here, but the market moved still for individual contributors last year. Like, we still need people to do the work. Again, I think these people were overworked because they were used to being, you know, maybe a team of 30 was now 7, and maybe you were doing threat intelligence and threat hunting, and now you're doing incident response and digital forensics. So I think teams were understaffed a little bit last year, and I think there was a feeling that they are still doing too much. But I think as an IC, that you could take confidence that, you know, if something didn't work out, you could find a new opportunity. That said, whereas a CISO is more of a consistent role, it has its nuances. Individual contributor roles can be very different. Right? So I don't think all IC roles are created evenly. Like, I look at, you know, application security talent did fine last year. Identity access management with new regulations, we're very comfortable. You know, on the security operations side, on the GRC side, it was certainly a lot slower last year. Again, crazy with regulation and change and movement. But I think I look at the markets, they're a little tighter. And those folks were, you know, probably had more access to opportunity. And then more on the logistics side, I think a lot of individual contributors, particularly through the last few years, had flooded inbox of very exciting remote opportunities.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about remote, like how that's affected the market.
That's the biggest shift, right? We look at, you know, the banks, the FANG types, et cetera, who were very comfortable letting people work from anywhere, that have kind of put their call together of, hey, we're going back, you've got X amount of time.
Is that paying off for them? Like, do you see kind of that backlash from the workforce saying, hey, we don't really want to do this? And are they able to find the talent, or are people settling?
So I think they got their timing right, where it was when they waited for the moment when the market was softer and they had all the power to do it. So long term, it will be a case study of whether it has worked. I still think, you know, the FANG types will give people enough money for it to make sense. But at the lower end of the spectrum, where it's like, hey, come back into our office in New York City or San Francisco or Boston, but we don't pay that much, it's very difficult to justify, right? It's really hard to get top talent for, you know, 140 grand in the most expensive places in the world for senior talent, when they can go to a FANG, or they can get that and stay at home in, you know, Ohio or Indiana or something like that and have a much better quality of life. So long term, it remains to be seen, and I think there is a lot of opportunities that stay open for a long time because they're 4 or 5 days in site, particularly in the more expensive areas of the world. But I don't know how it will play out long term. I think as the market gets a bit tighter, I think companies will feel some repercussion when there's businesses offering very good packages remote again, and I'm starting to see that a little bit more this year. But these companies nailed their timing to the point of where people can't quit like they could 2 years ago.
So let's talk about entry level, right? Because that's a thing that's been on and off for a while. We've seen a lot of comments, a lot of posts, a lot of people discussing, like, why aren't there more entry level jobs in cyber? And I think, you know, part of that is, in my opinion, Look, I mean, cyber, it requires a specific set of skills with some foundation.
Yeah.
And while I think there are some, typically that entry level is, you're a help desk, you're an IT guy. Like, do you see it the same way? Like, what's somebody who wants to get into the security market, and I'll leave it more broadly than just cyber. What's that path look like, and what's your recommendations?
Yeah. So look, I'm with you. I don't think cybersecurity is an entry level job. I think the stakes are too high. The teams are already too overworked. And so it's very difficult to hold, there's not these huge security organizations where they can kind of sandbox everything and not mess things up. If you mess up in cybersecurity, you miss an alert, you miss a vulnerability and ransomware or whatever, like that's horrible, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's an entry-level job, and I look at how people who are a little bit more experienced got their way. They were a software engineer who kind of fell in love with securing it. They were a, like you say, help desk, tech support, network engineering, admin, and have found their way. Or, there's the military, which is obviously a very good place to kind of learn. And then I think the entry-level market is very much in the consulting side where you get bought in on engagements. You don't really get into a customer's, environment. You're kind of advising at a very basic level and watching how it's done. But, I don't think it's a huge entry level market. And then the other thing is, and I kind of touched on this earlier, like the why. Like don't get into cybersecurity if you think this is the best place to make a buck, because you can make millions of dollars selling goldfish if you're good enough. Yeah. If you're passionate about making money, there are better ways to make money. That seems to me the
motivation from a lot of people, right? They're drawn to the salary.
And the reality is there is, and it's a lot of kind of boot camp certification type companies that will tell you the streets are paved with gold, and in 12 weeks you'll make $500,000 a year, and it's unfair, and people are taken advantage of, and it sucks. But there are better places to be. This job will grind you down if you're not passionate about it. And I think we go back to the point of people get into this job a lot of the time for the right reasons. And that's why you need to be here. I don't think it's the place to be if you're chasing a dollar. There's long nights. There's very stressful situations. There's very difficult conversations. And if your main why is not to protect assets, protect people, and do the right thing, there's better places to make money.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. Like, focus on what your passions are, right? And you'll be successful at the end of the day. Yeah. So, Stuart, anything else? Any other thoughts on kind of state of the industry? I don't know, feedback from RSA, like outlook for the rest of 24. What's your thoughts on where things are headed?
Yeah, so I think, look, this has been a much better RSA than last year. Last year was concerning. Everyone was on the edge. Obviously, we had the interest rates were still in flux. Money was very difficult to get. I think the overall vibe this year has been a lot better. There seems to be a lot of movement, both in the VC world, M&A, private equity. We see the No Name deal, the Wiz deal, and so it's very exciting. It feels a lot more exciting than last year. Which can only lead to more opportunity. If people are spending money, they need people, which is going to allow for opportunity. So I think the overall state of the industry, hard to say we're back, but it's a step in the right direction. and I'm confident. Obviously, we have the flux of an election year, which may spanner in the works the last quarter and the first quarter of next year for a little bit. But overall, I'm confident we're moving in the right direction. And I think, again, we're in great hands with some wonderful CISOs, some wonderful industry champions. And again, I think I'm excited to be here next year and see how we're setting. But yeah, the talent market is certainly improving. The opportunities are definitely out there for everybody, more so than last year. And I'm hopeful that we see the highs of 2021, 2022 again.
Yeah. Stuart, thank you very much for coming and talking with me today. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation,
Pleasure.
Good insights. Everybody, that's a wrap on this episode. We really appreciate you watching. Keep an eye out. I'm Ben Carr with Halcyon. Have a great day.